Hello and welcome to the BPHASA and the ARC Michigan PCP webinar series. Just a few reminders while we're giving everyone a few minutes to sign in. Your videos are shut off and the microphones are muted and the chat box is disabled. However, please use the Q&A function to ask questions to our presenter today, Sheldon. He will be answering questions live, and anything that we're not able to answer for you today, we will try to follow up with an email. And there are no CEUs for today's webinar or any of the webinars in this series. And you will receive a follow-up email this week with the link to the recording. So just a few more minutes, we'll let people continue to log in. And it is 3 o'clock, so I will go ahead and hand it over to Sheldon for today's webinar.
Good afternoon, everyone. Let me get my PowerPoint up on the screen so I can make sure that that's working properly. Excellent. Thanks for that, Heather. I really appreciate it. I am Sheldon Schwitek. I actually run a little consulting company in Michigan right now called In the Company of Others that I'm working at kind of part-time under the auspice of, but I also have a full-time position working as the director of people and culture for an organization by the name of Eros Group that does supports brokerage in New Jersey. And that work is a little more focused on connecting people to community, which is really where my passion lies, particularly around people with disabilities and making sure that they can have good and full lives. So I've been working in person-centered planning for quite a long time, really trained, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as we're going along, by some of the people who initially sort of coined the phrase and some of the modalities that people developed over time. But I always like to start off my presentations with a poem, and I'm just calling one up here so that I can read it all to you. The poem I'm going to read today is called To Be of Use, written by a former Michigander, Marge Piercy, who now lives on the East Coast of the US. So, to be of use. The people I love the best jump into work head first, without dallying in the shallows, and swim off with sure strokes almost out of sight. They seem to become natives of that element, the black, sleek heads of seals bouncing like half-submerged balls, the people who harness themselves, an ox to a heavy cart, who pull like water buffalo with massive patience, who strain in the mud and the muck to move things forward, who do what has to be done again and again. I want to be with people who submerge in the task, who go into the fields to harvest and work in a row and pass the bags along, who are not parlor generals or field deserters, but move in a common rhythm when the food must come in or the fire be put out. The work of the world is common as mud. Botched, it smears the hands, crumbles to dust. But the thing worth doing well done has a shape that satisfies, clean and evident. Greek amphoras for wine or oil, Hopi vases that held corn are put in museums, but you know that were made to be used. The picture cries for water to carry and a person for work that is real. So probably just start off with a little bit of an opportunity to sort of just let you know a little bit about me in how I came to this work and kind of where it's taken me to. I have a brother who was born with a cognitive impairment, a really slight one. He had something called hydroencephalopathy when he was an infant, and when the doctor told my mom that, she basically told the doctor, thank you very much. She'd been told that he would, Ryan probably wouldn't live beyond the age of beyond the age of about 2 that he probably ended up having a brain hemorrhage. And she decided that she was going to take him home and give him the best life that she possibly could imagine for him. And of course, like many people with disabilities, Ryan actually broke the mold a little bit. He graduated from high school, has been working at a crate and pallet manufacturing company for the last almost 20 years now, and not really the fastest person on the line, but he's considered the most proficient. And the reason I tell that story is that my mom actually hid that information from us for over 30 years. She didn't tell anybody anybody about that. Tender, I see your question. Are you referring to the fact that you see my whole screen and you just want to see the slides themselves? Okay. I normally don't mind them being seen on the side just because it allows me to see what's coming next in this particular presentation view. So makes it a little harder for me to navigate those slides. So let me see what I can do here. Yeah, unfortunately, it takes over full control of my screen. And so I actually can't even turn off and on the Q&A and so on and so forth. So, but thank you for the question and thanks for the reminder. I appreciate it. So the point being that he got involved in Special Olympics and was participating in the curling team on a curling team, and his curling team won the provincial championships. And because he had won the provincial championships and was going to compete nationally, even in Special Olympics, you actually need a diagnosis to compete nationally. And that's when my mom told us that. And I tell that story, as I said earlier, because I think it really shaped the way that I think about how we support people with disabilities. The school, I grew up in a small town in Manitoba, up in Ashern, Manitoba, and the school just had to make accommodations for him. That was long and was in Canada, and it was long before all of the different rights that we have for people with disabilities now in school systems. But my mom refused to let him get a diagnosis, to the point that they just made all these accommodations for him. And the expectations were that he would participate. And so for me, that plays a huge role in how I see what is possible for people with disabilities. So I worked that was kind of my introduction to disability in my own way. I was a caregiver for probably maybe a quarter of my career now. It's been a few years since I've updated this slide, but I definitely provided direct supports to people, worked in administrative roles all over the place, supported a young man from the time he was 13 until he was 21. And had helped him move out into his own home with 24-hour support while I was working in Canada. So just another shift of how we can imagine life for people with disabilities that is bigger than the one that we're traditionally thought possible for people. And that, again, really shaped the way that I think that we can support people. I worked with a lot of forward-thinking people here in Michigan. I worked for the Center for Positive Living Support. Some of you may remember the work we did around a culture of gentleness and supporting people who are really complex to move back into the community. But I think the big thing is that I've been working with families, and that I think that's some of the most important work that I've done for families to figure out how do we actually support people to be successful. There is this question out there, right? And I think we're re-looking at it in Michigan in a number of ways, this idea of person-centered planning and person-centered thinking. And do we have a really good definition of that, or where is it? Because it's developed over the years to become something that is all-encompassing, and it gets bantered around a lot. And I'm not always sure that people are talking about the same thing. So I have this great little video that I'll share with you all that I think sort of touches on this idea of the more expansive view that we have of person-centered planning. Oh, come on, video.
Being person-centered is really about getting to know a person and know what's important to them and how they want and need to be supported. It's about them being in the driver's seat in terms of how people support them in their daily life, as well as working towards their dreams for the future. So being person-centered as a support worker means that I'm not doing things based on my own perceptions. I really look at what matters most to the person and let them drive us on the way to their life in the future.
I think person-centered isn't just about one action. It's about a daily examination of people's lives. It's really almost an attitude about continuously thinking, would I want this to be me? Would I want this to be my life? And if so, how would I want people to connect with me? How would I want people to look at me, talk to me, touch me, and in turn, in a caring way, be able to support me to have a good day? I think sometimes the concern is that it becomes this one big event, and in turn, then the rest of the year is not creative or in a supportive way, but in turn, what we really want is people just to have a good day. And what does that look like on a daily basis?
We can be person-centered towards a person or with a person, but it's also being person-centered as a colleague. So in a working situation, we would want to be person-centered with each other as co-workers. So I get to know what's important to you as a worker in our environment and how you need to be supported by me, and vice versa, you would support me. In an organization, being person-centered means that everything we do it so that it's based on the information from the people we support. They guide our strategic planning from their information and what matters most to them. So instead of us imposing programs, services on people, we really look at their information, what matters to them, and how do we help them get there. And whatever's not working in people's lives, how do we take that information and then understand how we need to change as an organization.
I think oftentimes what we also need to do, once we've slowed down, we can just really look at the whole person rather than one specific behavior, one specific need, one specific gift. I think we need to really understand that people are fascinating and complex beings, and if we can look at the whole person, we can often see, I think, the most creative results. We can start to examine that I too am a whole person, and how can we connect? How can I best help you? And in turn, I think we provide best supports that way.
This idea of being person-centered is one that we need to carry through all of the work that we do. I think that I love the way that they talk about how it's not just about the people that we're supporting, but that we're person-centered with everybody. And I think this graphic is one of a number of people who are graphic facilitators, which is kind of the beginning of where I'm going to talk about person-centered planning and what it looks like, in that sense of, like, it is about thinking about ordinary needs for people, but it's also all of the pieces, right? Again, they describe this idea of how do we take the whole person and look at them. And some of the tools and many of the tools actually that we're going to be talking about are often looking at those ways of thinking about people that are all encompassing, that aren't just around services. One of the conversations I've been having with a number of people this last few, actually probably within the last year, is this idea that we somehow have taken person-centered planning into the system, but that we've kind of lost the thread of what true person-centered planning looks like, in the sense that we often relate it or forget that a person-centered plan is actually different than an individualized plan of service, as we call them in Michigan. We call them ISPs here in New Jersey. And I was just on a call today, and they have a tool that sort of leads people through some of those person-centered concepts. And they call it a person-centered planning tool. And it certainly touches on a wide variety of things, but I still believe that person-centered planning is a deeply held belief and philosophy that we need to carry through, and a way of asking questions of people so we begin to understand who they truly are and what they truly want. The thing that you see in this particular slide, this idea of ordinary needs around choice and control and contribution, sharing ordinary places, and belonging, are all connected to the work of John O'Brien and Connie Lyle O'Brien, who have been thinking about this way of planning for people and relating it to something that they call the 5 valued experiences and the 5 accomplishments. And that particular modality looks at how do we imagine a person and the life that the person could have from their perspective, and then what is our responsibilities as service providers, as family members, as community members, to think about what do we need to do to recognize that there's a sense of accomplishment with the person. So the 5 valued experiences are that people are have a sense of belonging, that they're respected, that they share ordinary places, that they make a contribution, and that they are really good at choosing what's good in their life. And from our perspective, as if we're looking at it from a service provision or a supports perspective, that there's this idea of autonomy, that people have a sense of autonomy, that there's community participation, that they have a valued social role, that they have a presence in the community, and that they have some competency in their life around some particular things. So I'm actually going to let John and Connie talk about it. They really go back to the beginnings of some of these person-centered concepts and talking about Wolf Wolfensberger, right? And thinking about his idea of valued social roles and social role valorization. So this idea of the 5 experiences and the 5 accomplishments go all the way back to what is considered like the beginnings of our belief that people who experience disability deserve the same life that you or I do, and that they should have a valued role in our communities.
The thinking, language, and practice of a person-centered approach to supporting people with disabilities emerged in the 1970s, along with the process of deinstitutionalization. 40 years later, we face great challenges in our efforts to remain faithful to the intent and spirit of work that honors the citizenship of all and builds a beloved community that works for everyone. And so we gathered to reflect on influences, actions, and learnings that have emerged through lifetimes of commitment to a just world that is built upon the contributions of all.
We benefited a lot, I think, from learning about PASS and using it and applying it to deep conversations about what was not working in programs. But then John and I started thinking, well, that's good about what's not working and what do we not want, but what do we want? What kinds of things are we trying to work for, not just what are we trying to work against? That's what led us to start thinking in some other ways, and led us to the 5 accomplishments and the 5 valued experiences.
Normalization, as Wolfensberger was writing about it, gave us some headings, but they didn't really work very well for us. So we began to think about what are some of the things that it's fair to say apply regardless of disability, and that indicate the kinds of experiences that go with a good life. Because there's so much variation among us in what we think a good life would look like, that we need to sort of think a little bit more about, are there any things that'll at least work for guidance? Are there any things that if we don't intentionally attend to them, won't happen for people who are receiving services for people with disabilities, except by accident, right? So What's likely to happen? People are likely to have small and homogeneous social networks. People are not likely to belong without intentional effort. People are not likely to be able to exercise autonomy, to be in charge of their lives. The sort of default position that we're wired for socially is to put them, not us, but them, under supervision, under control. And so we began to try to think about as the us and them, with them being the undesirables, belonging at the edge or outside of our community, as we thought about what are some common experiences that we have a say about in the service world. There are lots of things that we thought aren't our business, aren't the service system's business. People's religion and spirituality, for example. It's a vital dimension of people's lives. We don't think it's our business. It's our business to create the conditions under which people can pursue their own spiritual growth and development. It's not our business to sort of make that into something we want to do. And about that time, we ran across a thinker called Thomas Gilbert, who was a student of B.F. Skinner's, and tried to apply Skinner's ideas about applied behavior analysis to industry. One of the things that he came to as an insight was that it was critically important to identify what human activity was trying to accomplish. And so he defined quality in terms of accomplishment, and he defined accomplishment in terms of valued experiences. So we've got Eric Tristan telling us that we need to find ideals and we need to look for dimensions of human experience that we never get finished with. So we never get too good at choosing, never get too good at deepening our belonging, our citizenship. We never get too good at sharing the places and the activities and the rituals of community life in a skillful and satisfying way. We never get too good at developing our capacity to bring our distinctive gifts to other people. We can't finish fulfilling the valued social role of citizen. We end up with these 5 kind of valued experiences that let us apply Thomas Gilbert's idea and say, these are the things that we're trying to accomplish. We want to support the experience of belonging. And that's not going to happen if people don't actively and intentionally participate in community life. We want to support people's growth in their capacity and their opportunity to choose. That means that we have to figure out what the conditions for this person are that allow them to develop and to exercise their autonomy. We want people to bring their gifts. So that leads us to say, how can we help people to develop their competency, their signature strengths? That's kind of the basic idea. And because we had been working for a number of years with discovering ways to take rather quick snapshots of how people's lives, how people's everyday lives were going, we already had a number of simple kinds of processes for looking at people's everyday life. And those kind of lined themselves up pretty well with the accomplishments. It didn't take a lot of work to begin to say, these are good questions to ask. These are worthwhile things to look at in people's lives. And that kind of created windows. Each valued experience becomes like a window on people's experience. And it also becomes a container for shaping intention, which is what person-centered planning is about, is shaping collective intention around what a particular person finds meaningful and valuable in composing a life that they and the people who love them find worth living.
Hi, Sheldon. I see your mouse moving, but we can't hear you.
So sorry. I had
Okay.
myself muted because I had a dog barking in the background. I totally forgot about it. So my apologies. So let me go back to where I started when I was talking. I've been talking for about 2 minutes probably now. So this idea of these 5 valued experiences is one that I always try and talk about as the underpinning of the work that we're doing in being person-centered and supporting people and what that looks like. So this idea that we never get too good at belonging or choosing or making a contribution, that we can always improve on that as citizens in general. And this idea that if we ask the right questions, we can get people to those places where they can have these accomplishments. And then the second part being that we think about the, that we think about the, I'm getting these two things confused. We think about this idea of the 5 valued experiences, and in order to accomplish those or get the service system and the people around people to help, we have to think about autonomy as the outcome that we're looking for, and that people need to be choosing and they need to have a sense of belonging in order for autonomy to show up. This idea that choosing and contributing lead to competencies. Community presence shows up when people are able to make a contribution and share ordinary places. And so for me, this is the underpinning of what good person-centered planning looks like. What's the focus of the person or what we're supporting them to learn or experience in life? And then what are we trying to accomplish? How are we supporting them to accomplish these things? So now we're going to just dive into this idea of person-centered tools and what that looks like for people. The first 2 modalities that I learned about in person-centered planning were really about MAPS and PATH, both of which were acronyms, and I can still never remember the name or what MAPS actually stood for. So because we've been calling it MAPS and PATH for decades now, right? But these person-centered tools were two of my initial introduction into good person-centered planning. And ultimately, they are just a way of framing questions for people in helping them to think about that. In the MAPS and PATH process, this is actually usually a two people facilitated process. One person who actually asks and holds the space and asks the questions and shapes the conversation, and then another person who graphically records that. And that was originally brought into person-centered planning because people were doing planning for people who didn't necessarily always understand words or use verbal communication, and that we recognize that a picture can be worth 1,000 words. It can encompass a lot of a big conversation with one image or one idea. So MAPS often focused on supporting families who hadn't had an opportunity to tell their story and who wanted to share that and to bring people into their lives or into the lives of the ones that they loved. And so we would get them to tell a little bit about their story, what their dreams were, what the nightmare was, where they saw contribution showing up for people. And then in that conversation and the talking about contribution, then they would say, well, what would it take for those gifts or contributions to show up, right? And then get down to the nitty-gritty of what are the action items, what are the things that we need to do. And in the MAPS process, we get really specific, right? We ask who is going to do what and when they're going to have it done by. And I often say to support coordinators or people in the system, like, this is where your opportunity is to have goals written for you, right? There are ways to look at this traditional person-centered planning that can be worked into a plan of service. And it really is the distinction between the two. This is a much bigger overview of a person's life. So this is a map that I did for a young woman who was transitioning out of high school in the Detroit area. She had a really big core group of people who were supporting her. I think there's 3, 5, 8, there's 11 people who were at the center, but this particular map was held in a church basement, and there were about 75 people in attendance for that conversation with people. And what came out of that is that everybody in the room actually thought about the gifts for Samantha was her name, that they thought about the gifts that were possible for her. And then we started to think about where that could show up. And we literally had action items that included many of the people in the room, where people could figure out what they could do to help support Sam. PATH is another graphic process. Again, we actually get people to dream really big. And I think of PATH as almost like a strategic plan, a way to think about where are we right now and where do we want to get to. This PATH is actually of a conversation that my friend Shelley participated when we were doing some training around facilitating maps and paths, and she was the focus person, so some people could get practice doing graphics. And so this is an image of the dream, which takes place over here on the outside of the circle. We get people to dream really big, and then we get them to think about where are they going to be, what's positive and possible within a year, talk about the now, where they are right now in their lives and what that might look like, and then who do they want to help with some of this stuff, what do they need to get stronger, and then we literally work backwards and say, where do you want to be in 6 months, and what are the first steps that you want to take along the way. So different ways of thinking about this life that we're actually imagining for people. Essential lifestyles planning is another series of questions, and I'm probably going to talk a little bit more deeply about some of the tools in essential lifestyles planning in the next webinar, as we dive a little bit deeper into person-centered tools. But this and the learning community actually are still being utilized around the country, and the learning community actually does do an annual conference for people to continue to hone their skills and think about how they can utilize some of this stuff. There are pieces of many of these plans that are in ways of thinking about the work that are ending up have ended up being utilized or brought into the Charting the Life course modality that we're going to talk about at the end. But I'm going to just let the founder of Essential Lifestyles Planning talk about how the learning community came about and how it became this opportunity for people to think about good lives for people.
So Michael, as one of the developers of Essential Lifestyle Planning, how did it all get started?
It started in the late 80s, early 90s. Susie Harrison and I were at the University of Maryland, and we were being asked to get people out of institutions who were stuck. And they were stuck because of how people perceived them. There really were people who could fairly readily be served in the community if you got it right. And we started by looking at futures planning, and we went in and asked people, what's your dream? And the problem was their dream was to live anywhere but here. And they would tell us whatever they thought would help them get out, instead of what would help them get a life out. So we began Essential Lifestyle Planning by looking at what do people need to know in order to support people who were a bit challenging in community settings. And we discovered that the first thing we had to do was help them meet the person instead of the reputation. And then say what's really essential for the person to be successful, to have the life that they want, and then describe the best way to support them.
The Learning Community for Person-Centered Practice, Michael, what is it and how did it get started?
When we started with Essential Lifestyle Planning in the early 90s, we started collecting a group of people who were very interested in how it was done and how it was implemented. And those people started sharing information. And I found that more and more what was happening is I wasn't developing with one or two people all of the things that went into what was then called Essential Lifestyle Planning. It was a whole group of people who were collecting that information, and they also wanted to have a way to share it. So first, informally, we called ourselves a learning community. And then recently we said, well, we really need to do this in a more formal way. So we started having times for people to be able to get together and share. We created a website so that people could share. And then we began a voluntary organization, one that in the US is called a 501c3. And as we kept developing and we kept looking then at things like person-centered thinking tools, not just at Essential Lifestyle Planning, we started saying, well, you know, there's more of this than just Essential Lifestyle Planning. So the Learning Community for Essential Lifestyle Planning became the Learning Community for Person-Centered Practices.
And how can people get involved with the Learning Community? How can they find out more about it?
There are a couple of ways. The easiest way is to go to the internet. There is a website, learningcommunity, all one word, .us. There is Facebook. You can just do a search on Facebook. They can go to your website, helensandersonassociates.co.uk. And they can also, if they go to the website, find where they can get training and find how they could become trainers and contributors themselves.
Lovely. Thank you very much.
So as they said, the learning community is still regularly meeting. And in fact, it's traditionally that conference has been held on the West Coast, but if anybody's at all interested, it's worth taking a look. They're actually hosting their conference this year in St. Louis, Missouri. So a much closer commute, so to speak, for people in the Midwest, if you have any interest in sort of a deeper dive and understanding some of the ways in which you can plan for people. And like I said, I'll be diving a little bit more into Essential Lifestyles Planning at the next webinar that I'm doing next month. So there are other person-centered tools. Beth Mount has been a leader in person-centered planning for several decades now, and call something called personal futures planning. Again, kind of through Inclusion Press, you can get more information about that. They have some really great resources for person-centered planning in a variety of ways. There's also other leaders who have been thinking about and modalities for doing and planning for people. David Petoniak at deimagine.com has specialized in supporting people who can be very complex to support and what it might take to support them and to plan for them. Aaron Johannes at Imagine a Circle has been thinking about and doing some incredible ways of thinking about getting people connected to communities. He's also an incredible graphic facilitator. LifeWorks out of San Diego has developed something called the Liberty Plan. They also have written a book that talks about intentional teaming and how do we get teams together to plan intentionally and think about how we support people to have good lives. And then, as you heard, Helen Sanderson and Associates has been working, and I think the first video that we watched, there was somebody who was connected to Helen Sanderson and Associates doing some of that work still today. So all these places that we can get an opportunity to get connected. The one thing that I think can be really helpful as we're trying to plan for people is to start to recognize their gifts. And I can't help but bring up my friend Judith Snow talking about giftedness, because I think it is the piece that we really need to be focusing on when we're thinking about how do we support people. We often in the sector talk about giftedness and the gifts that people bring to the work, but Judith was the person who coined that. And for those of you who don't know who Judith Snow is, she's worth a little bit of a dive into person-centered practices and thinking. She was the first circle of support that was formed to support her to move out of what was then a long-term care facility and into her own apartment with some support, and really the first circle of support that included people like Jack Pierpoint and Marcia Forrest and a number of other people in Toronto who literally stole Judith out, quote unquote, stole Judith out of an institution and took her home in order to make sure that she could have a life, because she was really on a way to probably not being healthy enough to live anymore. She was someone who had a pretty significant physical disability, but was also had a master's in philosophy, which is when our friend Marcia Forrest met her. And they really worked together to develop some of these person-centered plans, as you saw in the tribute at the end of the video on the 5 valid experiences and the 5 accomplishments. But I want to share this video because I think it really gets into this idea of what do we think about the gifts of people and how do we look through a lens of giftedness that allows us to understand who people truly are at the core. And that sometimes when we look at through a lens of deficits, we lose sight of the gift that actually we think is a problem. And so I'm just going to let Judith talk about her friend and my friend, actually, Miriam, and the gift that she brought to a community.
I'm going to tell you another story to really capture this idea of what I mean by giftedness and what I think the scriptures mean. And this would fall under kind of the grounding idea, but also the hospitality idea, and also the networking idea of giftedness. I have a friend named Miriam. And Miriam asks a lot of questions. So how I met Miriam was that in 1993, a co-op started in the middle of Toronto, and the idea of the co-op was to be inclusive. And in 1 month, I think it was 56 of us moved into the co-op all at the same time. And we had never met each other. Now, in any urban context, if 56 strangers move into a building with 3 floors of apartments, the chances that they would actually meet each other are very small. Like you could literally live there for about 5 or 6 years without meeting all 56 people. You might meet 2 or 3 actually. So within 3 weeks, we all knew each other. How did that happen? Well, Miriam loves to walk into people's apartments without knocking. She loves to ask people very awkward questions, like, why is your nose so long? Or, you know, why do you wear that color? And then she goes into the next apartment without knocking and tells everybody what she just found out about the person in the previous apartment and asks them the same questions. So within, you know, days, we were all talking to each other, if only to figure out what to do about Miriam, right? But this is the real story. The building that we moved into was originally developed for condos, but the developer had gone under and the city had bought the building and turned it into social housing. And along the way, to cut costs, they had changed the air circulation system. And we didn't know that. So when I moved into the building, very soon after I got there, I started to feel sick. Now, if it wasn't for Miriam, I would know that I felt sick. But because of Miriam, we knew that we felt sick. And we got onto it very quickly and discovered that what was happening was the air circulation system was picking up the car fumes from the car park that was underneath our building. So we were able to get the city to put in a modification to the air circulation, and only one person died. Not perhaps several people before we figured out what was going on. So in other words, Miriam saved a number of lives. Miriam turned us into a community, and Miriam gave us the power to be able to advocate for ourselves. That's a gift, according to the scriptural sense of giftedness, because she healed the community.
So this idea of giftedness is one that I think continues to show up even in some of the newer tools that we're doing. And I just want to spend the last little bit of this webinar talking about the Charting the Life course tools and just do a little bit of an overview of them. And I'm hoping at the next presentation that we talk about essential lifestyles planning, and then I'm going to talk about the Charting the Life course tools and an opportunity for us to think about the different ways that we can utilize some of these tools to ask the right questions and to support people in the right ways. And actually, I'm probably going to I think I can flip to the big screen here. So the life course tools were created in at the University of Missouri, Kansas City, and they're some formal planning tools that are kind of, I feel like, are in some ways a repackaging of some of the things that we already knew that were helpful in person-centered planning. But that what I really love about these tools is that they are actually focused on this idea of we all could need some help in planning and thinking about what it is. I love that they look at it from a formal perspective of tools and forms, that they have tools that self-advocates can utilize, they have tools that families can utilize, and they have these formal tools that we can utilize within the service system as well in supporting people. And recognizing that those are all good places to go. I think the idea of a number of tools, I've actually utilized several of them in my work when I was working directly in Michigan. I'm in trouble again with my mouse to be able to do some things. So this idea of different tools, so integrated support star, a life course portfolio to explore the 3 buckets, there are all of these different ways in which they think about it. This trajectory tool, which I actually had an opportunity, and that probably, in my opinion, is one of the most versatile, but that each of these tools can be focused on a particular person, a particular situation. They can be short-term planning tools and they can be long-term planning tools. So recognizing that the life course was really created on a premise that we want to be able to have different kinds of conversations and bring different ways of thinking into the work that we do and the hopes that we have for people, that it helps to encourage some higher expectations for people, and that they can integrate a number of types of support. The integrated support star I love is because it gives such a different perspective on the ways in which we could think about planning for people and what that might look like. They've created them so that they're usable by anybody. And it's not just about the tools or a program. It's actually about, again, an underlying philosophy that person-centeredness and person-centered planning are important, and that they recognize the importance of not only the person, but their family as it's defined by people who are supported. There's a question here I'm going to try and get to. So Laura, give me a minute. We're going to get to a Q&A in just a second. So again, just a number of overviews, right? Thinking about the life domains and the life stages that we all go through. I've done a number of paths in my life, and I think it's important to recognize that our plans change over time. And so are there opportunities for us to notice a particular time in a person's life, right? Planning in infancy is very, very different than planning for somebody who's transitioning out of high school, or somebody who's trying to move into their own apartment. All of those things are really important. 3 buckets of support is another way to think about it. The person in context of their family and their community, recognizing that there are reciprocal roles for each of us to play in people's lives, are all parts of this. As I said, I think that integrated support star is one of my favorite tools, in the sense that it looks at these different areas, right? What are the community-based supports that we know the person has access to, and what are some that we want to aspire to? What technology do people have and what is needed? Personal strengths and assets, thinking about what the person brings and what we might want to develop. This idea of relationships, what are important relationships for people? And then finally, where are the eligibility specific things that the system can bring to support the person, are all. And then the other thing I love about charting the life courses is that they literally have all of their tools are available online, as are many of the ones that I've been talking about today, and that you can take them and utilize them. And in fact, they've actually figured out how to make sure that there are PDFs for people to be able to use and literally be able to type in what you're recognizing are important for people. That idea of the trajectory, thinking about where people are, where they want to be, or where they have been, what's been good historically, what hasn't been good or helpful, what do they want to make sure isn't brought into it, and then what's the vision for what they want, and what is the vision for what they don't want to have happen in the work that they do. And that's really just an overview of person-centered planning tools and ways in which we can go about person-centered planning. So Laura says, and you know that some case manager or psychologist would be working so hard to get Miriam to stop bothering people, not to pry and not tell everyone else's business, right? Exactly, Laura, that idea of giftedness. And Miriam was a woman of questions. I lived with Judith. Judith and I owned a home together for about 2 years in Toronto. And so Miriam was definitely a part of my life as well. And this idea that that she, and I think we all probably in the service sector know someone who asks a lot of questions. Miriam's always the person who is asking a lot of those questions. So the questions actually, and the answers that Miriam got, like Judith said, they actually changed the community because they figured out that they were all suffering from something that was really life-threatening. And the fact that they were all, the carbon monoxide was an issue in their home Judith would have been another one of those people because she had limited breathing capacity, who really could have ended up dying as a result of that. So are there any other questions that people have? Feel free to type them in. We've got about 6 minutes. I always like to leave some space, but I also have another poem that I'd love to share with you to end, if you're up for
Well,
that.
Sheldon, while we're waiting, I'll give people just a few minutes to type in any last questions that they have. I do want to remind everyone that they will get an email with a PDF from today's presentation, as well as a link to the recording. So if there are things that you wanted to go back, some of those names and some of the things that we've talked about today, you will get those resources emailed to you later this week.
And then there's my email address. If anyone wants to take that down, you feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to help you tap into any of those resources as well. Well, if there are no other questions, then I am. If something pops up for you, but I'm gonna stop, finish with it's a bit of prose from Margaret Wheatley. And those of you who don't know Margaret Wheatley, she's really been thinking about this idea of community and how do we build community around ourselves and others. And there are some really great books. She actually did a spotlight on a number of social justice movements, and one of them, in fact, in one of her books, her latest books, she had focused on the work, the sort of human rights work that was going on in Detroit as part of her looking at good communities and what they could look like. So this poem's called What I Believe. People are the solutions to the problems that confront us. Technology is not the solution, although it can help. We are the solution. We, as generous, open-hearted people who want to use our creativity and caring on behalf of other human beings and all life. Relationships are all there is. Everything in the universe only exists because it is in relationship to everything else. Nothing exists in isolation. We have to stop pretending we are individuals who can go it alone. We humans want to be together. We only isolate ourselves when we're hurt by others, but alone is not our natural state. Today, we live in an unnatural state, separating ourselves rather than being together. We become hopeful when somebody tells the truth. I don't know why this is, but I experience it often. Truly connecting with another human gives us joy. The circumstances that create this connection don't matter. Even those who work side by side in the worst natural disaster or crisis recall that experience as memorable. They are surprised to feel joy in the midst of tragedy, but they always do. We have to slow down. Nothing will change for the better until we do. We need time to think, to learn, to get to know each other. We are losing these great human capacities in the speed up of modern life, and it is killing us. The cure for despair is not hope. It is discovering what we want to do about something we care about. There's a line, that one of those last lines in that poem, that I think really resonates when we're thinking about being truly person-centered and planning for people, right? This idea that we have to slow down. Nothing will change for the better until we do. We need time to think, to learn, to get to know each other. And if you only walk out with one thing from this presentation today, I hope that it's that we need to find more space for that in the work that we do. And if there's no other questions, then I guess we probably can sign off.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much, Sheldon. And thank you everyone for attending today. And we will get those resources emailed out to you this week. And I hope everyone has a great week. Thanks.
Yeah,
Thank you again so much, Sheldon.
Yeah, I hope everyone gets a chance to join for the second part. We'd love to continue the conversation.
Yes. We look forward to seeing you all back next month. Thank you again. Bye-bye.